Hello there, and welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about workplace violence. I wore my happy shirt specifically for this occasion. Peace, love, and sunshine. And don't we just wish life was peace, love, and sunshine all the time? I know that I do. But I also know that realistically speaking, that is not always the case. And unfortunately, in healthcare, we nurses get a bad rap when it comes to bullying, okay? I'm sure you've heard nurses eat their young, right? It's really something that makes me very sad. I certainly have never been a nurse that has done that, and I truly mean that. I never have, only because I think it's just mean. And the reality of our lives as nurses is that at some point or another, we will experience this. You may have already experienced this. Sometimes student nurses experience it. All types of people in the healthcare setting experience it. Even physicians while they're in training and while they're in residency can experience this. So this isn't something that people in healthcare are somehow immune to in a certain levels of healthcare. It really happens all throughout the different disciplines in healthcare and all throughout the hospital in various units and settings and places. And so I want you to be aware of it. Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what it is, how to recognize it. But I think I would be remiss if I didn't give you some practical tools for how to deal with it, okay? So that's what we're gonna do in this lecture. We're gonna actually talk about what to do about it. And there's actually been an evidence-based research project done on this topic. And there's research that shows that if you do what they recommend based on this study, you can stop the bullying almost 100% of the time. What? How is that even possible? Well, let's find out. So let's talk about workplace violence. We are going to define it first, just like everything we do. Workplace violence consists of physically and psychologically damaging actions that occur in the workplace or while on duty. Workplace violence is commonly found in clinical settings, including long-term care facilities. So you'll hear all these interchangeable ways of referring to it: workplace incivility, workplace violence, lateral violence, horizontal violence, bullying or aggression. Call it what you will. It's all the same to me. So bullying or aggression, incivility, is really repeated, offensive, abusive, intimidating, or insulting behaviors, abusing power, unfair sanctions put on individuals by individuals of a higher status, makes the recipients feel humiliated, vulnerable, threatened, thus creating stress and undermining their self-confidence. I mean, that's what it is, okay? And so when we talk about repeated offensive, abusive, intimidating, or insulting behaviors, you know, we really need to be aware of how we're feeling, okay? And so in the instances where I have been on the receiving end of workplace incivility, I wasn't aware of it because it wasn't overt. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't like the person was screaming and yelling at me and pointing a finger at me and making it perfectly obvious to me that they were criticizing me and belittling me and like putting me down. Like it was It wasn't obvious. It was insidious, okay? And that's where it can be really difficult for you to identify what it is, right? So you have to dig deep and ask yourself, if you're starting to feel so stressed about going into work that you don't want to go, and you've got to ask yourself, why? What is the reason? What is the root cause of your stress and anxiety about your job, okay? Is there something happening repeatedly in the work environment, and does it seem to be happening with a specific individual over and over again that causes you to feel uncomfortable, okay? Abuse of power or unfair sanctions that make recipients feel humiliated, vulnerable, and threatened. So the idea here is that this person makes the schedule. And you don't want to work every weekend. And you know that if you don't behave in a certain way, this individual has a tendency to take it out on some of the people at work by scheduling them unfairly. Scheduling them to work more weekends or more holidays or more of a schedule that they don't like to work, okay? That's an unfair sanction, all right? You feel like you're trapped, like you have no control over what happens, right? And if you behave in a certain way, that there's going to be this outcome, and you don't think that you're being treated fairly, but you can't quite put your finger on it, right? And this can be really hard. And so you have to ask yourself, like, what am I feeling? Am I feeling humiliated a lot at work? Am I feeling threatened a lot at work? And it may not be this overt threat, but it may be this, oh, well, I know if I don't do X, Y, and Z, that it's very likely that, you know, I'll have this fallout as a result. If we're thinking that way or feeling that way, or we're frightened of certain people, we avoid them, consistently avoid them, because when we're around them, we tend to feel humiliated or insulted. That's a clue that you may be the recipient of workplace violence. Creating stress, undermining another nurse's self-confidence, right? I mean, the image that we see here is this nurse kind of going like, duh, why don't you know this? You should know this. I mean, this is a perfect example. You're a brand new nurse. You're getting used to the routines on the floor, and there's something that you're supposed to do, and you don't do it because you don't know you're supposed to do it. And another nurse on the unit is like, why didn't you do blank? And you're like, oh, I didn't know. Well, what do you mean you didn't know? How could you not know? Well, you automatically have a tendency, and we do this as humans, to feel like you're wrong. You should have known. You're the guilty party. What's the matter with you? How did they even give you a nursing license? That's all wrong thinking. That's all wrong. Okay, I've been a nurse since 1998, okay? If I went to work on a brand new unit in a brand new hospital that I've never been to before, there would be plenty of things that I would not know, okay? I've been a nurse for a long time. I've taught nursing for a long time. But that doesn't mean that I know everything that goes on in any particular unit. Routines, schedules, protocols, right? And I do get training when I first come in. We all do. But we all know that nobody's perfect, and we may not remember. So what I want to encourage you to do is to be able to realize that you are going to fall short here and there. But if somebody is repeatedly pointing the finger at you and saying, why don't you know? You should know. You should keeps coming out of another individual's mouth, then they're probably bullying you. and you're feeling more and more incompetent as the days go by and are questioning whether or not you ever should have gone into nursing to begin with, those are red flags. If you weren't meant to be a nurse, you wouldn't have graduated from nursing school and the state wouldn't have licensed you. Okay? So you've been through nursing school, you've taken a state board exam, and the state of Hawaii has said, you pass. You meet the qualifications to begin nursing at a safe beginner's level. They have given you the gold star, all right? That means you're qualified. So don't let anybody tell you that you're not, okay? Now, some of us may need a little bit of extra learning. Some of us may need a little bit of extra orientation, and that's okay. But when you start feeling like you've entered into a profession that you are not qualified to be in, think again. Because once you're licensed and you're in it, the state says you're good enough. I'm your teacher. I say you're good enough. And you've got to believe it, okay? You're the one that has to believe that. So, who does it? Usually, nurses in the least powerful position manifest these behaviors amongst themselves and then target those with the least power. Newly hired or new LPN and RN nurses, okay? So either a newly hired nurse who's maybe been a nurse for a while but is still new to the facility, or somebody who's worked in the facility, maybe as a CNA, who's now been licensed as an LPN, finished LPN school, and stepped up into that role as the LPN. And so it's these least powerful individuals who tend to behave this way, and they always love to target those who are new, because people that are new are unsure about themselves and they're easily knocked off balance, okay? So why do they do it? Well, a lot of times this is what we hear. Well, this is how people treated me when I was new. This is how people treated me when I was learning. I went through the same thing when I came on, okay? So they're treating you the way that they were treated. But that doesn't make it okay, all right? But that is one of the reasons that we see this happening, okay? Because it was done to them. So what we need to try to do is try to stop the chain, right? We got to try to stop it. And so I always tell nurses that I'm training, please remember, once you've become a seasoned nurse and all this becomes second nature to you, that you don't start getting short with other people that are new to it. Always remember what it was like to be new at this. And don't get frustrated and short with people who need a little bit of extra attention. If we take the time to train them and treat them with dignity and respect, we'll have more help in the workplace. It's going to be a better place for all of us, okay? So, what are the consequences? What happens as a result of this? Research shows that it stops new nurses from asking questions. That is very dangerous. That it stops new nurses from seeking validation about things that they think that they do know, right? That it stops new nurses from acquiring the knowledge base necessary to grow clinically, all right? Keeps them from feeling like they fit in. So the consequences of this are pretty severe. I mean, I think that new nurses should be encouraged to ask questions, encouraged to seek validation, and encouraged to acquire the new skills and knowledge that they need to grow clinically. And we most certainly need to make them feel like they fit in. So, here's a statistic for you. 60% of newly registered nurses leave their first position within 6 months because of some form of lateral violence perpetrated against them. 60%. It's a lot. And it's for this reason. So here's the thing. We have to start calling out the elephant in the room. We can no longer sit back and let this go on and on and on without speaking up, okay? So let's talk a little bit about some of these insidious ways that the bullying happens where we're not really even noticing it, okay? So here's one for you. It's called a verbal innuendo. And it's when there's an insinuation or a remark or a question regarding a person that's intended to be derogatory. The intention is often to insult or accuse someone in such a way that one's words taken literally are innocent. I'll give you an example. Mr. Jones' antibiotic was hung an hour late. And new nurse Mary said that, well, she thought it had been hung on time, but she was just so busy with her overwhelming workload that she must have forgot. Now, these things might all be true, what I just said, right? But you can tell that by the way I said it, I was insinuating, right, some pretty negative things about new nurse Mary, all right? When somebody raises their eyebrows, rolls their eyeballs, crosses their arms, postures, it's called posturing, takes this posturing towards you while they're communicating with you, they're saying a lot to you non-verbally, okay? And so when somebody says, Mr. Jones' antibiotic was hung an hour late, new nurse Mary thought that it had been hung on time, but she was really busy with her overwhelming workload, and gosh, she forgot, you know? We need to work with her. We need to figure out how to help her prioritize better. Instead of being sarcastic, being postured when we deliver this information, okay? A verbal affront is a snide remarks or saying something unfavorable and then pretending that you were joking. Oh, I was just kidding. Don't take everything so seriously, right? You get into this situation where they'll say something negative to you. You say, excuse me, am I understanding you correctly? Are you saying this? No, that's not what I was saying. You're overreacting, right? This is called a verbal affront. And what this is it's a way to bully someone and then just pretend like you didn't mean it, like you were just kidding. And it's very frustrating. It's very hard to put your finger on. Undermining activities, when someone turns away from you or they're not available to answer your questions. Withholding information about a practice or a patient. So in other words, withholding information about a certain way that a skill needs to be done for a certain patient, or withholding information about the fact, that, Mr. Jones's dentures are lost and that his son is coming in at 2 o'clock today and is probably going to be pretty upset when he gets in and finds out that those teeth are missing. Not telling the nurse that in report, who's taking over your shift and taking over care for Mr. Smith. I think she probably needs to know that before the son shows up, okay? And then what do they say? Well, it's not my fault you didn't know. Well, you didn't tell me, okay? You didn't tell me. Sabotage. Deliberately setting up a negative situation, okay? Infighting, bickering with peers, spreading rumors throughout the unit about an individual. These are all things that will undermine good teamwork and a positive workplace environment. Scapegoating. That's attributing all that goes wrong to one individual. That's when there's somebody on the unit, every time something goes wrong, there's that one nurse and they're like, oh, it's her fault. It's her fault. If you trace it back, it's always her fault. It's always your fault, right? Not okay. Failure to respect privacy, right? Talking about something private without the person's permission, broken confidences, sharing a confidence that you were asked to keep, right? It's important. We can see this nurse here whispering in another nurse's ear, did you hear about so-and-so, right? So, there is a research article that came out a few years back, teaching cognitive rehearsal as a shield for newly licensed nurses, okay? A shield for lateral violence, an intervention for newly licensed nurses. And so a lot of this information comes from that article. So here's the plan for how to put forward this technique. Receive the information, hold it in your mind. Do not react. Process the information based on what you've been previously taught, okay? And then reply with a previously learned response. So this is almost like role-playing and planning how you're going to respond to the person that's bullying you before they even do it. So you have identified that they're doing it, and now you're going to go back into the situation and you're going to respond to it in an intentional, purposeful way, okay? And so what happens is, theoretically, it allows individuals to stop and not automatically process this event as a personal affront. So when somebody is kind of behaving in a negative way towards us, we automatically get defensive and we want to respond and react. And what this technique is teaching us is not to do that. This technique is teaching us to stop. Just look at the person. You don't have to respond. You can just do what I'm doing right now. You don't have to look upset. You don't have to seem angry. You can just say nothing. I'm giving you permission, okay? It's hard to do. It's a hard thing to do, but it's important for you to practice. By doing so, individuals then learn to respond differently to potential harmful inferences of lateral violence. If you don't just automatically jump into defense mode and give yourself a chance to think and breathe and then respond, maybe you don't respond at all in that moment. You say, you know, I need a few moments to just think about this, and let's get back and we'll talk about this later. Go, cry in the break room, think about it, and then re-engage, okay? Give yourself permission to remove yourself from the situation, okay? So, when you're getting a lot of nonverbal innuendo, like raising of eyebrows, face making, crossing arms, eyeball rolling, you can say, and this is one of the canned responses that they came up with, that they had these new nurses use, I can sense, or I can see from your facial expression, that there's probably more that you want to say to me, and it's okay for you to speak directly to me. That's all. Now, that's not a natural way for us to respond to someone that looks like that, who's staring at me. But I can point out what I see. I can see, or I can sense that your facial expression is telling me that there's like probably more to this than I'm getting from you, and I just want to invite you to just really tell me what's on your mind. Okay? It's not that hard. So here's the nurse, calmly, has her arms crossed too, so she's a little guarded as well. It's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. I sense from your facial expression that there may be something more you want to say to me. It's okay to speak directly to me, okay? And so this is one of those cognitive rehearsal techniques. Here's another one. If someone withholds information from you, withholds information about practice, or withholds information about the patient, you go back and you re-engage with them after you find out that you have not been given the proper information. And you say, it's my understanding that there is more information available regarding Mr. Smith's lost teeth. I think if I would have known, it would have helped me impact the situation better. I probably would have interacted with the son when he came in a little bit better than I did. So I think maybe next time, could you make sure that I know things like that before my shift starts? If you could just relay that information to me during a report, I would just really appreciate that. There's an example, okay? Sabotage. When somebody deliberately sets up a negative situation, okay? Later on, or even in the moment, you could say, there's more to this situation that meets the eye. Could you and I meet and talk about what happened a little bit later in a more appropriate setting? That's all. You stop it right then and there. You know, let's just stop here, and why don't we continue this conversation a little bit later when we have a private moment to follow up, okay? Because what that does is it takes the intensity out of the moment, and yeah, you're still going to have that difficult conversation later, but maybe that will be when cooler heads prevail, okay? And so, all the nurses in Griffin's study stated that confrontation, no matter how civil they tried to make it, was difficult. Okay, fair enough. They described that they were markedly emotional, and they delivered the messages about the laterally violent occurrence with either crying or speaking through a very tight larynx. Okay, so what they did was they took a group of nurses who had been experiencing bullying at work, and they taught them kind of like the three verbal responses that we just went through. They rehearsed it, they taught it to them, they memorized it, and then they had them go back into the clinical setting and actually use them against the person who was being a bully. And so when they came back to process and debrief, it was very emotional for these nurses. They often cried. They often felt very stressed while they were telling the stories that they went through. But they did it. They did it. They stuck to the role playing. They used all the pre-canned responses. And guess what? Even though it was difficult for them, a resounding 100% of the nurses in the study who had lateral violence perpetrated against them confronted the responsible individual. Yay! 100% of the nurses did it. And guess what? 100% of the time, the laterally violent behavior stopped. This was a study. I'm not making this up. You can go look it up. I put the author's name in the PowerPoint for a reason. This tells us that a behavioral intervention with immediate confrontation, right, positively influences or changes actions of laterally violent nurses. Okay? Now, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, because we did say sometimes we don't want to immediately confront, okay? Sometimes we don't want to immediately confront. However, like the one where the person is standing there giving you a lot of verbal innuendo, and you say, you know, I can see by your facial expression that there's probably more you want to say to me. That's immediate. That can be immediate. And there's no reason that you can't do that. And they found that it is extremely helpful, and it works. So, what have we learned? Name the problem, acknowledge its existence, okay? Do a gut check. Start asking yourself why you're feeling so crazy about going to work, or why is it you're feeling crazy while you're at work, okay? Talking about lateral violence allows us to understand and view the behavior in a different context, okay? Not necessarily this context of blame where we feel like we're always doing something wrong just because somebody says so, okay? And we need to remember that an elephant in a room would be impossible to overlook, right? Thus, people in the room who pretend that the elephant is not there have chosen to avoid dealing with the looming big issue. And we've got to stop doing that if we want workplace violence to stop, okay? So, we want to confront the behavior. We don't want to react. We want to respond. And we want to respond intentionally, or we want to give ourselves a little bit of a reprieve in order that we give ourselves time to think about it and then re-engage with a calmer sense of perspective about what happened, okay? So I know that this is kind of a topic that kind of brings everybody's blood pressure up a little bit, brings mine up a little bit. I'm sorry that this exists in the world. I wish that this was life all the time. But I do encourage you to find the article, read the article, memorize some really good, passages that you want to use in these circumstances, and see if it works, because the research shows that it does. You confront a bully, generally speaking, the bullying will stop. But we don't have to confront them in an aggressive manner. We can confront them in an assertive manner, all right? We're going to talk more about the difference between being passive, assertive, and aggressive in another lecture. But until next time, I hope you learned something today, and I'll see you again very soon.